Brightness is not a feature that predators are allowed to have. In open daylight, a large moving body that reflects too much light crosses a threshold where concealment collapses into exposure and the math stops working. Yet it continues. White tigers exist. Their bodies grow to full mass, their muscles contract with the same force, their nervous systems fire at the same speed as any other tiger, but the color that makes them desirable to human eyes quietly dismantles the one advantage a solitary ambush predator cannot replace. Camouflage is not cosmetic. It is a survival function that operates before strength, before teeth, before intent. Remove it, and the organism does not immediately fail, which is the unsettling part. The white coat is not albinism in the strict sense, but a recessive genetic condition called leucism, reducing pigmentation without eliminating it entirely. The stripes remain faintly visible, enough to confirm identity, not enough to break the silhouette. To prey, species evolve to detect contrast and motion. This body does not blend. It announces itself as a statistical anomaly moving through a background that was never meant to contain it. The paradox is that nothing else in the system changes to compensate. The tiger does not become faster to offset earlier detection. Its energy budget does not expand to allow repeated failed hunts. Its territory does not grow larger to account for reduced efficiency. Every equation remains the same, except one variable has been pushed out of tolerance. In the wild, this usually ends the story early. White tigers rarely persist without human protection, not because they are weaker, but because the environment has no forgiveness parameter. Predators operate on thin margins, where a single successful kill may need to amortize days of metabolic cost. Visibility increases the probability of failure, and probability compounds without mercy. What makes this uncomfortable is not rarity, but persistence. The body does not reject itself. Development proceeds normally. Bones calcify, organs scale, neural pathways wire themselves as if the world were still configured for invisibility. There is no internal alarm that says this coloration exceeds safe operating limits. Biology does not warn. It only calculates outcomes. In captivity, the equation is artificially stabilized. Food arrives regardless of hunting success. Exposure has no consequence. The organism appears complete, even optimal, which encourages the illusion that the design is sound. But remove the external support, and the debt becomes visible. This is where the horror quietly lives, not in deformity, not in suffering, but in a system that looks finished while missing a critical function it cannot detect internally. White tigers feel wrong because they reveal how little redundancy exists in apex predators. There is no backup strategy when stealth fails, no alternative metabolic mode, no behavioral downgrade to safety. The animal is not broken, but it is out of spec. A predator engineered for disappearance, rendered conspicuous, still breathing, still moving, still burning energy at a rate that assumes success. And the world does not adjust. Nature does not intervene. The tiger simply continues forward, visible, functional, and already losing ground it cannot recover, not dramatically, not instantly, but mathematically, step by step, under rules that were never rewritten to accommodate beauty. When a system loses genetic diversity, failure does not arrive as a sudden malfunction. It arrives as tolerance erosion. White tigers are not random survivors of a rare mutation drifting through a healthy population. They are the result of repeated intentional narrowing of the gene pool, a controlled collapse mistaken for preservation. The paradox is that the animal still assembles correctly. Limbs form at the right angles. Organs reach expected mass. The predator looks complete, which makes the underlying damage harder to detect. Inbreeding does not usually create monsters. It creates bodies with fewer options. Each generation trims variability, and variability is where resilience lives. Immune systems become less flexible, making infection not more likely, but more decisive. Neurological development becomes less tolerant to error, so coordination issues, vision problems, and abnormal reflexes appear not as dramatic defects, but as small inefficiencies that accumulate. Skeletal abnormalities emerge not because bones are weak, but because growth programs lose fine calibration. A hip joint forms slightly off axis. A spine curves just enough to alter force distribution. None of this triggers a biological shutdown. The organism runs anyway. That is the unsettling part. Evolution does not enforce quality control at the individual level. It only filters populations over time, and time is something captive breeding suspends. In the wild, a body with reduced margins would simply not persist long enough to pass on its structure. In captivity, the filter is removed, and survival becomes decoupled from performance. The white tiger becomes a proof that biology will continue executing instructions even when redundancy has been stripped away. There is no internal signal that says this lineage has crossed a safe threshold. The genome does not know it has been copied too many times from too few sources. It only expresses what remains. What looks like fragility is actually rigidity. A genetically narrow animal is less adaptable, not weaker in strength, but brittle in response. Stressors that would be absorbed by a diverse population become system-level threats. Temperature shifts, pathogens, nutritional imbalance, all press directly against hard limits with no buffer. This is why white tigers so often require medical intervention to maintain baseline function. The body is not failing, it is operating without spare capacity. Every physiological system runs closer to its maximum load, because alternative pathways were never preserved. The horror here is procedural, not emotional. This is what happens when selection is replaced with intention, when survival is no longer a test, but a guarantee. The animal becomes viable by external enforcement, not internal robustness. Remove that enforcement, and the design shows what it costs to exist without genetic slack. White tigers are not accidents of nature. They are demonstrations of what life looks like when evolution's error correction is disabled. A large, powerful predator, assembled correctly, moving confidently, carrying hidden constraints that do not announce themselves until the moment compensation is required and nothing is left to compensate with. Large predators are supposed to scale smoothly. Muscle mass increases, bones thicken, lungs expand, and the system remains stable as size grows. Tigers break that expectation in a way that feels mechanical rather than animal. Their bodies operate closer to the logic of enlarged arthropods than forgiving mammals, relying on explosive force, rapid acceleration, and short operational windows. The paradox is not that this works, but that it continues to work at this scale. A tiger's musculature is optimized for brief, violent output followed by long periods of recovery. This design assumes that each activation will likely succeed because failure is expensive. The animal is built to sprint, not to persist. Energy storage, oxygen delivery, and heat dissipation are tuned for moments, not marathons. As size increases, surface area fails to keep up with volume, making heat retention a growing problem. Every burst of movement generates thermal load that cannot be shed quickly. The body compensates by limiting activity, not by improving cooling. This is where the big bug comparison becomes uncomfortable. Like an oversized insect, the tiger avoids continuous motion because the physics of its own mass work against it. There is no scalable solution inside the design. Bones absorb tremendous stress during acceleration and impact, especially in the forelimbs, which bear the brunt of landing forces. Joint cartilage operates under loads that leave little room for misalignment or wear. Small structural deviations, especially in genetically narrowed individuals, push the system toward chronic strain. Yet the animal does not slow down to preserve itself. The hunting strategy remains the same, because it must. Ambush requires speed. Speed requires force. Force demands structure that operates near failure thresholds. This is not poor design. It is specialized design with no safety margin. The tiger's nervous system reflects this extremity. Reaction times are fast, but not adaptable. The predator commits fully, because partial commitment wastes energy without payoff. This creates a body that behaves more like a triggered mechanism than a flexible organism. Once engaged, the system runs to completion or collapses into recovery. The unsettling truth is that increasing size does not make this safer. It makes it more brittle. A lion mitigates this through social hunting, distributing load and risk across multiple bodies. The tiger does not. It carries the entire mechanical burden alone. This is why the label big bug lingers among biologists, not as insult, but as warning. The tiger is a scaled-up strike system, not a balanced generalist. It exists because the math barely closes, not because it is robust. Each successful hunt resets the countdown. Each failure drains reserves that cannot be replenished quickly. The animal persists not by durability, but by precision. It does not survive by absorbing mistakes, but by avoiding them. And that is what makes it feel wrong. A large mammal that behaves like a single-use device, repeatedly reused, without reinforcement, in an environment that does not pause when the device needs to cool down. A tiger's body spends energy as if future success is guaranteed. The metabolic rate of a large ambush predator is not tuned for balance but for urgency. Even at rest, the system maintains muscle tissue that is metabolically expensive to keep alive. Protein does not idle cheaply. Each kilogram of muscle consumes oxygen, glucose, and maintenance energy simply to remain ready. The paradox is that this constant burn exists alongside long periods of inactivity, creating the illusion of efficiency. In reality, stillness is not conservation, it is delay. The energy deficit begins accumulating the moment the last meal is digested. Hunting does not reset the system to zero, it merely postpones collapse. A single successful kill may sustain a tiger for days, but those days are not free. Internal reserves are continuously converted into heat, neural readiness, and muscle tone. There is no low-power mode. When a hunt fails, the cost is not just the calories spent during the chase, but the opportunity loss of time, during which metabolism continues to drain stored energy. This creates a narrow operational window where repeated failures become exponentially dangerous. Unlike endurance predators that can downshift into sustained travel and scavenging, the tiger's physiology is optimized for decisive events. It cannot afford a long series of attempts. Each failed ambush tightens the margin. Fat stores diminish, muscle catabolism begins, reaction times slow imperceptibly, and the probability of the next failure increases. This feedback loop has no built-in brake. Nature does not intervene to slow the animal before it reaches a critical threshold. The tiger feels hunger not as a signal to conserve, but as pressure to act, pushing it toward another high-cost attempt. This is where the horror sharpens. Apex status is not stability, it is exposure. The tiger sits at the top of a pyramid that offers no support above it. There is no alternative food web to fall into if efficiency drops. Scavenging is rare and unreliable. Smaller prey do not justify the energy expenditure. The system is locked into a narrow solution space. Captivity again masks this reality. Regular feeding breaks the link between performance and survival, creating a body that appears sustainable. In the wild, the link is absolute. Energy accounting never pauses. Even injury does not pause it. A damaged limb does not reduce metabolic demand enough to offset reduced hunting success. Instead, it accelerates decline. This is why starvation, not combat, is the dominant cause of death for adult tigers in nature. Not dramatic, not violent, but mathematical. Calories in versus calories out, integrated over time, with no forgiveness for bad luck. The unsettling truth is that the tiger's power is what traps it. The same musculature that makes it lethal also makes it expensive. The same specialization that puts it above competitors removes fallback strategies. It is not a predator with excess. It is a predator operating on credit, repaid only through repeated success. Missed too often, and the system does not fail loudly. It simply runs out, quietly, according to equations that never cared how impressive the body looked while it was still functioning. A direct comparison between tiger and lion feels inevitable, but it is also misleading. The question of which one wins assumes a fair test of strength when biology never offers one. Both animals sit near the upper limit of what terrestrial predators can sustain, but they arrive there by accepting different structural risks. The paradox is that neither design is safer. The tiger concentrates mass, muscle, and responsibility into a single body. It grows larger on average, carries more absolute muscle, and generates greater peak force during short bursts. This pushes joints, tendons, and cardiovascular output closer to maximum load. There is no distribution of stress. Every leap, every grapple, every acceleration is absorbed by one skeleton, one heart, one set of lungs. The lion reduces individual load by spreading risk across a group. Social hunting lowers per-animal energy expenditure and failure cost, but introduces a different vulnerability. Cooperation requires coordination, hierarchy, and tolerance. Lions trade peak performance for redundancy. A single lion can fail without collapsing the system. A single tiger cannot. This is why hypothetical confrontations miss the real tension. The tiger is structurally optimized for solitary dominance, but solitary dominance has no error correction. Injury is catastrophic because there is no support layer. The lion is structurally less extreme, but socially buffered. Its design assumes access to others. Remove the group, and the lion's efficiency drops sharply. Remove the environment that allows cooperation, and the advantage evaporates. Neither animal is universally superior. Each is a solution tuned to a narrow ecological context. The discomfort comes from realizing how conditional apex status really is. Strength is not an absolute variable. It is a local maximum constrained by behavior, environment, and energy flow. The tiger's body carries more force than it can safely deploy repeatedly. The lion's body carries less force, but survives by not needing to deploy it alone. This reframes the question from who wins to who collapses first when conditions change. In isolation, the tiger risks overcommitment. In scarcity, the lion risks social breakdown. Both designs flirt with failure, just in different dimensions. What makes this unsettling is that neither animal can switch strategies. A tiger cannot become social without losing the very stealth it relies on. A lion cannot become solitary without losing efficiency. Evolution locks these trade-offs in place. There is no adaptive slider to move when conditions shift suddenly. The comparison reveals not dominance, but fragility. Two apex predators, each balanced on a different edge, each unable to retreat from the commitments written into their anatomy. The horror is not in imagining a fight, but in understanding that both bodies are already fighting physics, energy economics, and structural limits every day, and winning only because the environment has not yet pushed them beyond the exact boundaries they were built to tolerate. A system with no buffer can function flawlessly right up until it doesn't. The tiger is built without excess tolerance, not because nature was careless, but because excess is expensive. Every kilogram of reserve tissue, every redundant pathway, every fallback behavior would demand energy the animal cannot afford to carry. The paradox is that this creates a predator that appears stable while operating permanently near collapse thresholds. Heart rate, muscle output, oxygen delivery, and neural response are all tuned tightly to expected conditions. There is no wide operating range. When conditions stay within prediction, the system looks perfect. When they drift, even slightly, consequences scale quickly. Aging exposes this first. As the body accumulates micro-damage in joints and connective tissue, there is no compensatory mechanism to reduce workload. The tiger does not gradually retire into a safer niche. It must hunt the same way, with the same explosive demands, even as recovery slows. Injury accelerates decline not because healing fails, but because the lifestyle cannot be paused long enough to heal fully. A predator that stops hunting does not survive to recover. This creates a cruel feedback loop where survival depends on pushing a weakening system harder, not less. The white tiger intensifies this discomfort by removing even more margin. Genetic narrowing reduces resilience further, stacking constraints onto an already unforgiving design. What remains is a body that still obeys all biological rules, yet has nowhere to absorb error. This is why the tiger feels like a violation of comfort, not of science. It demonstrates that apex predators are not durable masters of their environment, but finely tuned mechanisms whose success depends on uninterrupted performance. There is no mercy encoded in the design. No internal governor that slows the system before damage accumulates. Nature does not install warnings, it only records outcomes. The tiger persists because, so far, the environment allows it to. When it doesn't, there is no dramatic failure mode, no sudden break, just diminishing returns until the equations stop balancing. The unsettling truth is that this is not an exception. This is what peak specialization looks like. A life form engineered to win repeatedly, not to survive mistakes. A predator that does not carry safety margins because safety margins would cost too much to maintain. It exists because the math barely works, and it disappears the moment it doesn't. That is why the tiger feels wrong, not because it is unnatural, but because it reveals how close to the edge nature is willing to build and how little it cares whether the system feels safe while it's running.